and welcome to The Curling Show, the podcast that brings you interviews with the sport's top athletes and the people who shape the game. I'm Dean Gemmelin. In this edition, we wrap up our more laid-back summer schedule with a conversation with Bob Labonte, a man who literally leapt his way into history at the 1972 World Championships. I apologize for some of the static and hiss, but fortunately, I think this will be the last interview that will have it. The problem seems to have finally been resolved. Runner-up in the 1972 World Curling Championships, and in my mind, the most famous American curler of the 20th century, Bob Labonte, welcome to The Curling Show.
Thanks, Dean. Thanks for the accolade. And, world champ for, I think, 7 or maybe 8 seconds. I'm not sure.
It was right. Well, you can time it now. It's in slow-mo on the CBC site. Hey, Bob, I want to get to all that went on in 1972, the kicked rock, the bizarre measure, the curse, and I'm sure that will be about the millionth time for you to discuss it. But first, where has life and curling taken you since then?
Oh, since then, we played in 73, and I think we were 8-0 in Colorado Springs and ended up taking second to a team from Massachusetts. So that almost hurt as bad as losing in 72. And we didn't get back to the National till 76, lost to Roberts, who went on to win the World. And we got back in 78, lost to Nichols, who went on to win the World. So we kind of set the stage in 72 and set up a few U.S. teams to win. And then in 83, played again, and I think we took 5th, played in 88, took 6th. Then there was a sabbatical for about 12 years, played in 2000 in Ogden, and I think we took 7th. So we progressed the wrong way. Typically you start at the bottom and move to the top, but we started on the top and sank. Played in a couple seniors tourneys.
Yeah. And you live in Minot, North Dakota now?
Right, Minot. I've been here since 1981.
Originally from Grafton.
Right, yeah, that's where we played in 4 nationals, 72 through 78, out of Grafton, with the Ossens and Tom Holt and a guy named Ray Morgan, who shot lead for me in 72. So John and Frank are still in Grafton. Morgan works for Piper Jaffray, a brokerage firm in Fargo, and I migrated to Minot, so we're still pretty close.
No, well, you've probably spent you have spent more than 35 years talking about the events in Garmisch Park and Kirkin. I'm only 40, so I've always only known about the events sort of through what people describe, but there is video footage now on archive.cbc.ca, narrated by young Don Chevrier, and I'd urge listeners to visit that site. I'll put a post on Curling Show, or a link on curlingshow.com. But when you look back, give me your version of the moments leading up to the spill and the confusion that followed.
I gassed 2 wide open hits in the 8th. I hate to mention that, but must have been the ice, huh? I wasn't nervous at all. We scored 2 in the 9th, and Canada needed 2 in the 10th to tie, 3 to win. So when I came to throw my last shot, they were laying 3. So 1 on the top of the 8, back of the 8, and 1 on the pot. So I threw an out turn, took the 2 on the side, double, and rolled to the pot for shot rock. So the irony was, if that rock had rolled another 3 inches out of Froze to Malischuk's rock, he wouldn't have had a shot.
Mm-hmm.
But nonetheless, he threw the hit and got a little wide, took our stone out, and he rolled. And as the footage shows, Frank swept that thing pretty diligently, and it came to stop. And I was back on the carpet, because back then, once you left the house, the third man took over. Maybe that's still the way it is, and the skip couldn't come back in and dictate any play. So Frank looked at the Canadian stone, he looked at our stone, he looked at me, and he gave me the high sign. So actually, he started jumping first.
That's what you see on the archive footage.
That's right, so everybody blamed me, but he was the first guy to start lifting the feet. So he gave me the nod, so I came off the backdrop there, pushed out of the hack, jumped as the footage shows, Bobby Big Air LeBeau. I think I put about 4 feet under me, and came down, kicked the Canadian stone, who was actually third shot, and pushed him in to second shot. They got 2 instead of 1, and beat us an extra end. So that was just a short synopsis of what happened.
To me, the most bizarre thing of the whole event was that the officials replaced the rock that you moved and then measured. I still don't understand that.
Well, actually, what they did, they asked Morgan if he'd kicked the rock. Of course, he said no. He and John were at the other end. They asked John, and this was Doug Maxwell, who was kind of the head official, even though there was a German umpire that had a patch over one eye and he couldn't see out the other.
The recently passed Doug Maxwell, a great ambassador for the game.
Right, yeah. He what?
He just recently passed away, Doug Maxwell.
Oh, I wasn't aware of that.
Yeah, this week, sadly.
Oh,
at 80,
sure.
but a good life in curling.
He was a great ambassador. I saw him in 2003 up in Winnipeg, and he had put out a book, and he signed one for me and one for John Osson. But that's the last time I'd seen him. Yeah, my condolences to the whole family. So he came out, and he asked Frank if he kicked the rock. And Frank said, no, I didn't kick the rock. And he kind of looked at me, and I was waiting, what am I going to say? If we win the measurement, we'd still won the game. But he never did ask me, so they came out, and they actually did measure it before they touched the rock.
Okay.
And they had beat us out by maybe a half inch. But at that point, I thought, had we won the measurement, the only place I could have kicked that Canadian stone was in, so it still would have been justifiable. But yeah, after I nudged them, and I don't know if it was 2 or 3 inches or 1.5 inches, whatever, they had shot rock by probably about a half inch.
I mean, to be honest, you kicked it harder than I thought. I always thought you just sort of grazed it, but you did get some major air there and come down and move it visibly. Yeah,
and actually, when I was in the air, I was conscientious about kicking the thing, so I tried not to kick it, and lo and behold, gave her the boot. But had a guy not even thought about it, I might have missed it.
Hey, do you think Dave Romano had a chance to look at both? He was looking at both in the footage. Do you think he had a chance to look at both?
You look at that clip in slow-mo, yeah, he looked at the Canadian stone, fairly lengthy, and he walked over and looked at ours and was standing over it. You could kind of see him shaking his head. So, yeah, I think he did.
Right.
And rumor has it that he discussed it 25 years later with somebody and kind of made mention that we might have had shot rock, and I'll leave it at that. But, yeah, Doug Maxwell, for years, in the book said that Dave didn't have a shot at looking at it. But, yeah, you can kind of be the judge by looking at that clip.
Well, they have it slowed down in this clip like the Kennedy assassination or something. It's pretty fascinating. But anyways.
The grassy knoll.
Yeah. It's like that.
Yeah.
Hey, Melchik, of course, went on to steal the extra end. I'm sure your team didn't have the benefits of a sports psychologist back in 1972. How rattled were you guys playing the extra frame?
Well, it's pretty difficult, when you, just like yourself, when you're a kid and you're playing at the local club and you're going, now this is a shot for the World Championship. Whether it's baseball, hockey, whatever, this is a shot. So looking at 3, playing the 10th, if I miss, he draws for 3, and we go, well, geez, we came close. So I throw the shot, pretty much the perfect shot, and make the double, and lo and behold, it looks like we won. So, yeah, pretty tough to get back in the frame. Although, talking to Don Duguid on the way back on the plane, he said we'd kind of screwed up not only in the 10th, but the 11th, because there was a center guard, and Orris tried to come around, and he put it on the 12-foot in full view. So we were debating whether hitting it on the nose, whether we would have had a counter or rolling behind the guard. Well, Frank wanted to nose it, and even if it wasn't on, Orris may have had to try the out-turn to come around instead of the same in-turn. But I called him off it and rolled behind that guard, full 12, while I gave Orris the same shot, and he put it on the back of the pot. So when I get down to throw the last one, now the crowd's cheering, and so, yeah, kind of emotional, so your brain isn't really there, and I think I took out the bar beyond the backboard on the other end. But at one point I had the guy sweep because it looked, narrow. But had I left that one up top, had it been a biter, Orris would have really had to play it outside with that in-turn or else try the out-turn, which nobody had played.
Right.
And there's probably a pretty good chance I wouldn't even have had to throw that last rock.
I'm sure the ice in 1972 is nothing like the standards of today.
No, it got pretty bizarre. Our sheets actually held up, but, you look at Nichols, which, by the way, is the last time the U.S. got the finals of the world, but he lost in 81, and that stuff was like playing on the street. But, yeah, back then, none of that. You had to crank the rock up and make sure you were there, and the sliding surface would wear down. They wouldn't come out after the 5th end and put a fresh pebble on it. And if you look at some of the curling gear we used, the bottom of that sliding foot was like a piece of floor tile.
Right.
And once that pebble wore off on that running surface, you had to fight to get over the tee line and then think about the shot.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it wasn't anything near, but you really didn't notice it because, it was a takeout game and a lot of the hits didn't require that much finesse.
So we know the ice was different. The sport was different back then, too. You played out of Grafton, North Dakota, less than 2 hours from Winnipeg. But did you travel to play in Spiels in Canada? Did you know Melchuk and his team?
No, I didn't. Basically, we did after we'd played that year. But prior to that, there were enough local Spiels, places like Park River, Grand Forks, Fargo. We really didn't go to Canada at all until we got some notoriety. Then we'd play the Heather and the Granite, and then we'd seen those guys, a few times on the circuit. And then went back to Switzerland and played, in Bern and Basel and that. So we spent a lot of time with them. But no, I had no clue until we got to the airport in '72 and flew over there with those guys.
You guys were pretty young, too, weren't you?
Well, I was 21, and John and Raymond were 21, and Frank was 22. But the key was in North Dakota back then, just to get out of the club, we had to beat Juni Tullickson, who was the 70 national champion and went undefeated. And there was also a guy that used to play with Fran Klefman out of Minnesota. This, I can't think of his name, Sheldon Anderson, I believe, was the third man for Klefman, Terry Klefman. And he was playing on a team in the club. So just to get out of the club was almost like winning, the state. So once we got out of the club, then we got to the state, and we had to beat Dale Dalzell, who was the 71 national champion. So just to get out of state was major. Then we got to the nationals, and we had to beat this Reeves from Massachusetts in a playoff game, who had been runner-up to Dalzell in 71. So we had quite a route just to get to Germany, but there were enough good teams and enough good Spiels in North Dakota. You really didn't have to travel too far to get some good competition.
Hey, when did you actually deliver the Labonte curse, and did you ever really expect it to hold until 1980 when Rick Folk finally broke it?
Well, somebody called and asked me how long I'd put the curse on, and I said, well, my curses usually last 7 years. So, yeah, it was from 72 to 79 through Barry Fry.
Yep.
I hated to do it to the Fry, but, 7 years was usually the tenure of the curses. And then Folk broke out in 80 and put it away. But yeah, it was 72 to 79, and they're usually about 7 years.
How did it come about though? Were you asked after the game, or when did you put the curse on?
Oh, I think it was kind of subliminal. I don't know if I actually came out and said, "Geez, I hope these guys never win again." But you know how you are.
Oh, it wasn't quite that dramatic, was it?
No, if they would have beat you, you'd have said, "I hope they never win again." But I only went 7 years.
Oh, sure, 7.
Nothing. But cursed myself for the duration. And then when I look at the way Disher lost last year, Craig and Cackle and company, to Burr, coming down that last shot to win the Nationals.
And it picked.
It picked, and then it picked in the extra. I'm wondering.
You think you laid it on North Dakota, do you?
Well, I do. And actually, when Craig got to Seattle in '97, that's when John Melke and Sterlickson and Sambor and Peterson had won the state. But Disher got back in through the state and then a second chance, and he actually won the Nationals in Seattle, and that was 25 years after we had won. So just look what it took to get that win. So last year it seemed like he had it in hand, and lo and behold, so the curse may still be out there.
It still may live.
Long live the curse.
Hey, for many years, you were really the most famous American curler, more well-known than guys like Bruce Roberts, who actually won world championships. When you look back, do you ever think it might have been the best thing that could have happened to you?
Well, I don't know if it's the best thing, but, it was kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy. My dad, were coming back from Winnipeg in '72, and he said, in about 30 years, nobody's going to remember who won that thing, but he said they'll always remember you. I said, Dad, I still want the ring. So it's, but you get a little antsy, and I can't say that we didn't win again because we lost there, but you might lose a little confidence. And the next year, as I say, we took second, and we lost out of the club the next year, and so you never know. But just to get the one shot, and there's some notoriety there.
There's no archive footage of Bruce Roberts on the CBC site.
No, Bruce, he just kind of resolved to partridge hunting, I think, in the north woods of Minnesota. I haven't seen him forever. But, and Nichols, as I say, he won in '78, and then Bud won in '74. So hopefully we set the tone in those 7 years for the U.S. to do some damage.
Hey, talking about that, during the '70s, American teams were usually in the mix at World Championships, but until Pete Fenson won a bronze at the 2006 Olympics and Todd Burr had his nice run last year in Edmonton, The performances by the United States in international play have been typically sort of disappointing. Why do you think it's been that way, and what's your take on the current state of competitive curling in the U.S.?
Well, undoubtedly, the foreigners have gotten better. Canada sent over a few reps years ago in the 70s to coach them, and they got better. But Canada has remained as good as they ever have been. So I just can't put the finger on why the U.S. doesn't win. I mean, undoubtedly the talent is there. But it's just like, the old school. If you lose enough times, you forget how to win. And I've just got no clue. Pustovar and company in 02 and Bismarck got to the semis.
Right.
And probably should have beat Furby the eighth. Just kind of a miscalculation where they probably could have had two and end up getting the one. And then I think back in 85, I think, that Wright, he got to the semis.
He lost to Al Hackner in 85 in the final. Tim Wright.
But just to get to the semis is even a tough mission for the teams these days.
Well, these days, you're right. The international field is awfully strong now.
So I just don't know. You look back in the 70s, and that was pretty much a hit game. So whether that was more our forte, because, the Europeans, they were always drawing back when we were hitting. And if they had the hammer, they'd throw up a guard, and we thought, God, that's goofy. And then they'd be using the push brooms. We were using the corn. So pretty soon everybody went to the corn and went to the European style of play. So, you got me.
It's interesting because now many European teams play a little more conservative hit game.
That's right. So I think they always liked that game, but they couldn't keep up. But, it's because, we used to throttle those Europeans, by 20 points sometimes.
Right.
But, they've really come around. And but I don't know. What's your take on the U.S.? I think the competition, the players are as good. It's just...
I think, to be honest, in my mind, it's just that the, and I'm speaking as a guy who's competing in the U.S. these days, but I just think the talent pool is thinner, and we have 20,000 curlers, so you have to travel to play against Canadian teams and whatnot. So, I mean, I think, you're just going to have more solid teams in Canada where it's part of the culture growing up and everything else.
Well, that's the case. It's like hockey. And if you grow up with a hockey stick in your hand, and that's, there's a lot of kids playing the game these days, but there's so much interference with hockey and swimming and basketball and all that type of thing. It used to be you could do both. I played hockey and curled. But now if you play hockey, you don't even play football. I mean, it's just
right.
a year-round sport. So you're right. Yeah, the pool is getting thinner in that regard.
That's a good point, though, because you don't have guys that maybe dabbled in it as juniors and then get more serious when they're older. They usually don't play at all when they're juniors. And then, as a guy who started playing golf when he was 30, it's difficult to pick up any sport as you get older.
That's right, yeah. So if you get introduced and kind of keep it up even on a minimal basis, you can't wait to bust out, win the high school and, play the juniors and all that. So there's so much available to the kids that we didn't have back when. We had no place to play when we were 19 or 20 because there was no juniors, and you had to be 21 to play in the men's. So we did nothing at 19 and 20, unfortunately, because the juniors would have been a nice stepping stone.
Hey, a club like Grafton, more members or less members than when you were curling there?
Oh, I think they've pretty much held their own, but, a lot of the oldsters passed on, and there weren't that many youngsters coming up. So I imagine their count is down. It's like mine back when I think we had, 200-300 members. Now we're down to 100 or so. So, I think across the board, everybody's down a bit. Right.
Well, hopefully we can, definitely on parts where the game doesn't have as much history, the Olympics certainly spur membership rises, definitely out here on the East Coast. So we'll see what happens over the next few years. Hey, Bob, we finished with the run back. I give you a topic, and you give me your thoughts in 1 to 3 words.
Okay.
All right. So, the Worlds in Grand Forks in 2008.
Very, very interesting.
Ben Tucker.
The curler elite.
Garmisch Park and Kirkin.
Very memorable with the curse.
The dearth of women's entries in U.S. playdowns.
Very weak.
I don't understand why it's so low. I don't know why, we had 7 teams in it last year, and I know there's more women out there.
Well, look at the seniors. It's, I think they had, 2?
Really?
And at one point, to go to, maybe it was last year, or the year before, I don't think there was a contender. You just signed up and went. So that amazes me because, it's only 50 and there's got to be a lot of teams or women out there that have played, years ago and they've still got the touch.
Hey, your fitness program in 1972.
Let's see, what was it? Beer, whiskey, and cigarettes.
Orris Melischuk's.
No. Orris, very good Canadian curler.
Hey, did you actually smoke during the game like Orris?
Well, the irony was, if you look at that last shot...
Yeah, he's got the smoke right in his mouth.
But yeah, so they build it up, and people watch that clip, and they think that's my last shot in the extra end. So, some people that are on the swim team here, they said, "Jay, you had that cigarette hanging out of your mouth." And I said, "That wasn't me." But if you look at the still on the other end, yeah, Frank had a pack of cigarettes. I had a cigarette hanging from my mouth. So when I landed, the USCA actually airbrushed that thing out, so it looks like I'm missing half my face. But yeah, it was kind of bizarre because you could on the ice and everybody did it. So it was. But for Orris to come out and he had half a coal hanging at the end of that thing.
Right.
So we thought, how bizarre these days. If that thing would have fallen on the rock, they'd have said, "Oop, burnt rock."
Right.
U.S. wins.
Well, the amazing thing is, too, you guys are all smoking and pounding corn brooms all game. Unbelievable.
Yeah, with the corn broom, Morgan and Austin were awful good at that, as were the Canadians. But just look at the longevity of the game now.
Yeah, I couldn't imagine. Maybe that should be an interesting thing, though. One time we'll make two of the top teams smoke during the game and use corn brooms and see what happens.
Well, I think, I don't know what Bud's regiment was or Roberts, but it couldn't have been too far off. But, yeah, maybe that was our forte. So getting back to your original story where we're not competitive.
Well, yeah, I think now we see guys, you don't see many guys that look out of shape anymore at the top level. And finally, Bob, wearing a gripper over the slider when you're not throwing the rock.
Too much hassle.
You still don't do it. I thought for sure you'd be doing it now.
No, I'm always sweeping, of course, so, you got to have something to slide around on.
Right.
Well, they used to say my dad shot lead for Orville Gillishammer when they won the Nationals in 1960, and he'd go out and he'd take, he used street shoes back then, I think, but he'd take the gripper off and he'd kind of feel the ice a little bit, and then he'd kick a rock from side to side, and lo and behold, he'd throw that rock and usually hit the forefoot. But he could tell what the ice was doing just by feeling it with the shoe. So that's what I'm doing. I'm feeling it.
You get the feel through the shoe. All right.
Yeah.
Well, I hope you can't do that with a stainless steel or thick Teflon slider.
No, I'm thinking even the cement feels slippery.
All right.
One of those babies.
Hey, Bob, thanks for your time. I do appreciate it. I know you get asked about this time and again, and I might get a little tired at times, so I appreciate having you on. It's a great story. I love to look back at history in curling, and like I said, I think in some ways it might have been the best thing that happened to you.
Yeah, it certainly hasn't hurt, I think I told a guy in Grand Forks, he said, "Well, do they still talk about it?" And I said, even if somebody falls down in the parking lot at the Worlds, they bring up my name.
They sure do.
So it's synonymous with tipping over. And I don't know if you watched the Olympics in Ogden, but it was Martin playing Trulson.
Right.
And somebody bumped the rock. I know it was on the Norwegian team, but Chevrier, he very seldom ever mentions my name, but he said, "Yeah, back in 1972, a young upstart, Bob Labonte." Lo and behold, the Canadians lost.
Well, here's my clarion call to the listeners is this season, whenever somebody falls, to call it the Labonte.
Yeah.
All right?
Bobby Big Air LeBeau.
Okay. Thanks, Bob.
Thanks,
enjoy
Dean.
the rest of the summer, and good luck on the ice this year.
Thank you. You too.
That's Bob Labonte on The Curling Show. Thanks for listening. September is shaping up to be a busy month for this podcast, so make sure you check for new interviews.